Okay, so we are officially live and we are starting our webinar. So we are both live on our webinar platform and also on our YouTube channel. So welcome everyone and thank you for joining. For the ones that are watching us on the YouTube channel, if you would like to ask a question to our speaker and take part in the discussion, please register to the webinar platform because here we have active chat and you will be able to type your questions here and you see the link in the stream description. So, my name is Olena Grynuik. I am director for the Central Eastern Europe at the SME Banking Club, and I will be your host today. And today we speak about mobile banking, mobile onboarding, and mobile security. And my guest today is Petr Dvořák, CEO at Vultra, a company that specializes in securing digital systems. Hello, Petr. I'm very glad to have you today.
Hello, Olena. Great to be here. Great to be here.
Before we go to the topic, let me very shortly mention the organizational moments. So our webinar is scheduled for 45 minutes. We are recording this webinar, so right after we finish, you will receive the link to the video and the presentation itself. And we start from the presentation, and after we finish, we have time for questions and answers. So please type your questions into the chat, even during the presentation, if you have one. So you're welcome to join this discussion. So let's go to the topic. So we decided to discuss the topic of mobile onboarding and mobile security, as we do see that there is the adoption of mobile banking and usage of mobile phones in general has been rapidly increased during the last 2 years, and more banks started to develop their mobile applications as a separate channel, so not the additional one to the online banking. And of course, it brings new requirements to the mobile security, to the customer experience, and let's discuss it. Petr, I'm passing over to you here at once to tell us more about this.
Excellent. Thank you very much, and thanks everybody for joining. I will be talking about this exactly right topic for the time of mobile onboarding. Olena made a perfect introduction to the topic, and I will try to follow up with a little bit more information. So first of all, a little bit about myself. My name is Petr Dvořák. I am the CEO and founder of a company called Vultra, which is a cybersecurity company from Prague in the Czech Republic. I have 15 years of IT experience, mainly with the focus on digital banking and finance. I am also author of the Czech National Standard for QR payments and 2 cybersecurity patents. I love open banking. I spent quite a lot of time building systems on new API platforms that emerged throughout Europe. And I was also the author of the first PSD2 application in the Czech Republic and also of early version of Bank ID. Vultra as a company helps banks and financial institutions to secure digital banking, be it on mobile or web. We were founded in 2014. We have over 550 references worldwide. We currently operate in 5 regions. So one of the things that we noticed is a big change which is currently happening in the world of mobile banking. It's something that just a couple years ago was difficult to imagine. I mean, mobile applications were always kind of evolving and started as something very small and additional and became something dominant. And mobile onboarding is exactly something that is changing very rapidly. Mobile onboarding is basically about how you allow people using your mobile application. It can be mostly when you say onboarding, people think about new customers, but it's about making the usage of mobile application in general. So for existing customers as well, ideally, if you just imagine the vision of onboarding, people do not really distinguish between, being new customers and being some already established customers. They are just using your mobile application. But it wasn't always the case. We are currently basically bearing some heritage of a previous era. and I will deep dive to it a little bit more. So if you talk to almost every bank these days, they tell you that we are mobile first. The strategy is mobile first, which is a really powerful statement. It's something that sounds especially great if you can make it in person. On the stage at the presentation, you can enjoy your Steve Jobs moment. It almost feels like you just invented the iPhone. But then, unfortunately, the reality strikes back. And if you ask banks, so how do you activate your mobile application? They give you some options that are definitely not mobile first, like the internet banking. You can go to the internet banking and scan a QR code there, or you can visit our branches and we will help you activate the application at the branches. Or you can go to our ATM. ATM is ready to show you the QR code and you can just scan it. Simple. Or you can call our call center, which technically this is a mobile first option, but not in a way that we probably would expect in a digital era. And so the point is that this is for historical reasons. Basically, I was building mobile banking since 2012 for some of the banks in the Czech Republic. And the way we looked at mobile banking was basically, it was a fancy keychain, fancy keychain, part of jewelry. It was shiny, sparkling, beautiful, typically on the iPhone. So we built this mobile application. I selected Komerční banka because this was our first customer. This is the first mobile banking I personally built. And we didn't expect people to use it for banking, really. It was more of a marketing statement to build a mobile application for iPhone at the time, especially since you had all this big screen state of the typical internet banking, which was at the time dominant. This was the way to use banking services through the classical computer on the web. And so in the beginning, the internet banking was basically your mobile onboarding tool as well. For the customers, this was definitely the primary channel, which at the time was considered secure. Basically, we knew how to secure internet banking. We thought that the internet banking is secure, and therefore we used it to manage mobile banking. Also, the projects around internet banking were a little bit more, let's say, stabilized, because mobile banking, all of these initial projects were a little bit punk. It was basically some small department at the bank, heavily influenced by marketing, building a new application on platform nobody knew how to build. It was different. Currently, you can see much better efforts on mobile banking. Also, the internet banking was accepted by people. Typically, if you asked customers in Central Europe and Eastern Europe and even in Western Europe, they actually only knew the internet banking. Just for the reference, the first mobile banking was released, I think, in 2011 by the Royal Bank of Scotland. So it's not such a long time ago, actually, in fact. And the internet banking also provided full feature set. You could do anything from it. So it was obviously, a logical choice. Unfortunately, we currently stick with it until these days. And if you think about it, the internet banking is kind of open hacking tool. It's available online to every attacker 24/7 for phishing, wishing, smishing attacks, which typically lead to account takeover. What we can see increasingly in the Czech Republic is that fraudsters are using social engineering techniques to gain full access to the internet banking, specifically to the activation process for mobile banking. And after the attackers gain access to mobile banking, they basically have free hands. They can do anything. And surprisingly, this is growing. It's well, maybe not surprisingly, it's growing. It's growing faster than we expected. This is what is surprising. The tactics is devastatingly successful. We have some data from the Czech Banking Association from the past months, and we can see that approximately 50% of fraudulent calls are successful, meaning that every second attack results in a damage, and average damage is basically 10,000 euro. So people are losing money, quite a lot of it. You can also see the trend, which is not very optimistic, because in 2022, we basically see almost tripling the number of attacks over 2021. We are not finished with 2022. We have only data until July, but if we just project it, we are looking at some bleak trend here. The interesting thing is that people actually do lose the money, because Whatever we do, we primarily do to protect the customers, but when damage happens, we are protecting the bank. And since the attacks are typically based on social engineering, we are typically able to show that the customer was basically tricked, and the bank typically doesn't refund the money to the customer. Now, if I should make a first key takeaway from this webinar, is that people lose money because there are insufficient mobile onboarding procedures in the current digital banking setup. Whatever we were doing up until now used to work. 2 years ago, it was fine. Now we are seeing problems. It doesn't work anymore. We need to change how we do things. So what is the future of mobile onboarding? So the future of mobile onboarding is mobile only. Typically, people shouldn't need any other devices. They should be able to do everything just on mobile. Of course, it needs to be secure, which typically means it needs to be phishing resistant, ideally passwordless process of onboarding. There shouldn't be anything that the user needs to enter manually. We need to have strong KYC and AML assurances during the process. Of course, the process needs to be PSD2 compliant. And against these last 3 bullets, there are business requirements. The process needs to be done quickly, under 5 minutes, and ideally there should be no prerequisites. We shouldn't request too much from the users. So obviously the last 2 items bring some challenges. I have spent hours and hours, maybe days of meetings, which were extremely complicated. For example, we had this problem, what happens if a customer loses a device or forgets password? So we were discussing, should we introduce some different password for the customer, if they forget the one primary password, or should we give the user some other devices if they lose some the primary device? And we were basically running in circles. So these discussions were super complicated, and what we did is that we actually adopted this customer model, which we internally call a naked troll in a phone booth, which, thanks to the marvel of AI-generated images, we can now see visually, if you want it or not. And what does it mean, a naked troll in a phone booth? The user is typically remote. There are no visits to the branches. We need to do everything remotely from the mobile device. The user doesn't remember anything. Whatever you ask, they don't remember. They forgot their first name. They have no idea who they are. They also do not have anything besides some commonly available items. And from the different perspective, they say and type everything to everyone, to everywhere. So they are susceptible to various types of attacks. They are not able to verify that they actually talk to the bank. So how do we go around it? It basically means that we need to rethink everything. We need to select some different building blocks for mobile onboarding. Some of these blocks are critical. We need to have them no matter what. The first critical building block is ID document scan component, something that allows us to recognize passports, personal IDs, etc. The second important building block is server-side facial biometrics, which allows you to recognize users based on their facial features. And finally, SMS OTP. Please do not, I know, do not disconnect. SMS OTPs have been discussed quite frequently. Trust me, I know what I'm doing. I will explain it a little bit later, but we will need SMS OTP in the process currently. We will maybe be able to get rid of it later. So how does the process optimally look like? So this is just an example. Of course, you can always adjust the flow. You can have slightly different flow for new customer onboarding and slightly different flow for the existing customer onboarding based on, for example, some settings and preferences that the customer already made. But in principle, the first step is that the user needs to identify itself somehow, typically through document scan, by scanning front side and back side. That's of a personal ID. That's how we basically identify the user initially. However, this personal ID doesn't really serve as any part of strong customer authentication process that we will need later. The strong customer authentication is handled a little bit differently. In the second step and third step, user establishes local credentials on the mobile device, local PIN code, and local biometric protection through common items on the mobile device like Face ID or Touch ID. After that, and this is the important part, we have strong customer authentication step based on two factors, which is server-side biometrics and SMS OTP. The server-side biometrics can be, it can be, for example, hand recognition, but typically for, let's say, usage or adoption reasons, we selected facial recognition. And after the strong customer authentication step, the user is inside of the application, ready to do the banking activity. This process we have already designed for several banks in the Czech Republic. We are currently releasing the first one. If you build it like this, with these items in an entire European context, this will be compliant, sufficient, and will probably give you the best user experience that you can achieve. So what about the SMS OTP? I promise that I will explain it a little bit better. So it's basically a compliance item. It doesn't really fulfill any sufficient security purpose in the process, but based on the opinion of the European Banking Authority on the elements of strong customer authentication under PSD2 from June 2019, we basically need to have some second factor, some possession factor. And if we zoom into it, then we will see that possession of a device evidenced by OTP, such as SMS OTP, is currently considered compliant based on practices, while a personal ID card with possession evidenced by card details which are printed on the card are not. So we cannot use personal ID as a possession factor. We need to use something else. And if you look at suggested and compliant choices, there are really just a few of them. There is basically not too much to pick from. So we decided to include SMS OTP as a compliance item. I think that once we have most of the personal IDs with NFC chips, NFC capabilities, we will be able to replace this step just by data read from the card, which will further improve the process. And we will definitely get rid of the SMS OTP after that. So the key takeaway number 2 is that if you are building this onboarding process with the elements that we just presented, there are surprisingly few steps. It's actually really fast, especially if you think about onboarding a new customer, somebody who is completely new to the bank. And while many of the checks actually happen on the back end, for example, if you are trying to check some blacklisted personnel or some problematic behaviors, you can do it, invisibly for the user. Even those steps must be basically based on quality. It cannot be just some technology for facial recognition that you put together over one weekend. It has to be ready-made and certified solution. And let's talk about the requirements, because quality actually illustrates differently for different items. So for the ID document scan, what we are looking for primarily is fast and reliable recognition. You cannot let your customer fiddle with the camera for 5 minutes just to scan the front side of the document. Since the document scan in our flow doesn't really consist any part of strong customer authentication, surprisingly, I would recommend to favor speed and reliability of recognition from some additional checks, such as authenticity of the document. We do not really need it at this point because we will get to it a little bit later. It also depends on where we actually get the photo of the customer. We have seen different approaches, and it also depends on the local legislation in various countries. For example, in the Czech Republic, we need to rely on the picture extracted from the document itself, which in case of scan of the document is a little bit unreliable. In other countries, such as in Slovakia, for example, there is an official government database of biometric information which you can use to identify the person, which is definitely better. In a long term, I would also focus on solutions that support NFC-ready identity documents, which ultimately means it also supports the MRZ, the machine-readable zone reading. But as you probably see around yourself, many of the documents in Europe are still without the NFC capability. With facial biometrics, this is slightly different. As you can probably guess from the process, the facial biometrics, the requirements on it are much stricter, because the facial biometrics is the most important step of the entire flow. The process needs to be compliant, and the solution needs to be compliant with a certain regulation. And so you should be looking for solutions that already have certifications, for example, to ADAS, or even have some experience with PSD2 scenarios. The second question is maybe even more important. For every biometric solution, no matter which one, you should be asking about the statistical characteristics of the solution, because today it's actually it's difficult to distinguish the solutions. You should be asking about false acceptance rate and false rejection rate. But if you do not ask, it's really easy to fool you, because if the system somehow recognizes the face, then it's really difficult to say what is the statistical probability that it will recognize many faces correctly and incorrect faces as well, right? As fraudulent, basically. And since we currently do not really see attacks on biometrics, it doesn't matter. You know, everybody can basically claim anything about biometric authentication. You should be looking for solutions that are able to claim and prove some statistical characteristics. You definitely need solutions with liveness check, which is almost a market standard these days. You just have it everywhere. And deepfake detection, which is emerging threat. As you saw with these AI-generated images, we will probably have some fun with these too in a couple of years. Finally, you should also look at solutions that provide protection from some sophisticated attacks like hacking the camera stream, which is surprisingly a threat that you need to account for if you want to assure high assurances of the verification. So you need to prevent somebody feeding camera data for some fake user to your camera stream. The triangle basically shows the stages of facial biometrics. Face recognition is about recognizing the person. Liveness check is about recognizing if the person is real or just photo or video. And real time is about real-time presence. It's about really verifying that the customer is now here during the verification. I will show you how it looks practically. We are using this biometric component that uses color flashes on your face to help you basically establish this presence. It's basically challenge response type of authentication. The screen projects light on your face. We later analyze it. We see if this reflection matches the expected pattern, and after that we are providing assurances of genuine presence of the person. So the key takeaway 3 that I would like to make is that for building simple, user-friendly, compliant flows on mobile, there are already some ready-made components. You do not need to build it yourself. It's basically about selecting the right building blocks from the market. And of course, we will be happy to help you with that at Vultra. So please do not hesitate to contact me. This is everything from me for this presentation. And back to you, Olena, for questions.
Thank you very much, Petr, for your presentation. It was very interesting and useful as usual. So thank you. I do have several questions to you. Meanwhile, I invite our attendees. Please type your questions in the chat, and we will be able to read and answer them. Let me also probably do this to see us better. So my first question to you will be the following. You mentioned at the very beginning that back to 2020, there was a case that banks mainly focused on the online banking, and mobile banking were created mainly for the marketing purposes. What we see now, especially for business customers, right? For the individuals, the picture is better. But for the business customers, this is still the case, that the banks are really focusing mainly on the development of the online channels for business customers, and mobile banking applications usually have, I don't know, on average half 50% of the functions that are available in the online banking. And also, as you mentioned, as the mobile onboarding is not going through the mobile, as the customer onboarding is not going through the mobile, so you upload mobile application as a business customer when you already have business account opened in that concrete bank. And if you don't like, or your customer experience in the mobile application is not the best on your opinion, usually, other business customers do not have time to switch to another bank, and they just either skip using mobile application and continue using online application. So my question to you is, which challenges do you see right now when you implement with the bank? So what is stopping them? Because as you say, so like a lot of banks really announced that the mobile first and the development of mobile channels is or will be the priority in the very nearest future. While still we don't have it, we don't see it in life, yes, in the usage of the customers. So what are the main stoppers, and what should change? What banks should do in this direction?
I think what I can actually see with the customers is that the biggest problem is that this is all new. This is all new to them, and it actually happened really fast. So I do not blame the customers for being a little bit, anxious. I remember that I was lecturing mobile development lecture at Masaryk's University in Brno. And at the time, it was really difficult task to just identify faces on the picture. Just to make a rectangle around a face, and it was 2014 or something like that, so a couple of years ago. And recently, with the boom of computer vision, facial recognition, artificial intelligence, and all these things, these use cases, such as recognizing users' face reliably on a mobile, which is a smaller computer, were developed. It was just recently. It wasn't available for a very long time. So there are new options on the market, but the banks are also used to something. They are used to this idea of mobile banking being basically a fancy keychain for the internet banking, something that is the big channel, the main channel that they typically use. This is especially true in the Central European and European context in general. Of course, if you look at Africa or Asian markets, this is completely different. They have skipped all this phase and they are starting mobile first. So I think it's about changing the way we look at things, and maybe also about just accepting reality, because of course I presented some numbers about attacks in the Czech Republic, which are for us as for a security company really devastating. We do what we do so that people do not lose money. And suddenly we can see that because everybody is activating mobile banking through some insecure channels like the internet banking, which is currently publicly available, it's basically open hacking console for the attackers. We cannot serve our primary purpose, and we need to fall back to the secondary one, which is basically providing sufficient proof to the bank to, not to pay the money to the hacked customer, which is not what we want to do. And finally, it's also a technology challenge. Let's face it, many of the biometric systems or systems that we need to use are running in the cloud. So, for example, if some of the customers are still not open to the cloud computing, they cannot really move forward with biometrics, for example, server-side biometrics, because these systems are typically hosted centrally in the cloud.
Customers, so, you mean banks, right?
Yes.
Yes. We still have, yes. There was actually a news this week here in Poland that ING Bank is moving to cloud computing, yes, and several banks as well, but this is still new.
Exactly, and you just need to make some steps at the bank to make it happen. So, for example, you need to go through some cloud compliance review internally. After that, you need to submit some documents to the national regulator, to the bank, just to approve the strategic outsourcing. It takes time. It's basically about recognizing the problem, designing the solution, how it should look like, and after that, going through all the administrative tasks and IT development tasks. So that's what is the biggest barrier, I think. It's new.
How banks what is your experience and your opinion on which stage banks should start thinking on the mobile onboarding? I mean, we do have a lot of banks that implemented mobile banking already, right, for the business
Yeah.
customers, and they do not have mobile onboarding. So, I mean, of course, it is better to think on everything when you start from the very beginning, from the scratch, right? But how they can do now implement mobile onboarding with the existing applications?
So from the mobile banking perspective for existing applications, this is a new activation process. So it's basically a redesign at a certain relatively well-defined part of the mobile application. You do not really need to change anything else. You just need to add additional button on the first screen the customers see, and you need to be able to create a device linking or basically registered devices. So the PSD2 requirements based on a slightly different process than just a QR code. So just to give you some example from the Czech Republic, that's actually a pretty good market for experiments and for innovation. The first bank which implemented mobile onboarding, basically they at the time called it online account opening, was Moneta Money Bank. And at the time, there was basically a vision. It was a big consulting project with a lot of McKinsey consultants and all these people who were projecting the future, 15 years ahead. And we were thinking, who would open a bank account on a mobile, device? So impractical. And in the first year, I think we were right because it were single units of new accounts per month, so not so much. But after that, Airbank showed up as a second bank that allowed this. Basically, they designed the process, and after a while, I think 2 years it took, it was expected to be the market standard. You basically currently can download any application from any bank in the Czech Republic and you can fully open account online just with the mobile phone, nothing special. Already, it's something that we generally accept. But still, the banks didn't extend it for existing customers because from the PSD2 legislation, the process of acquiring new customer and onboarding existing customer is slightly different. Of course, it makes sense because existing customers already have some payment history, some accounts, balances, and so on, which are also covered by banking secrecy. So you need to have different processes for it. But if you think about it, not really. You can have actually pretty similar processes. So what we did initially is that alongside the account opening process, we actually designed this digital re-enrollment for existing customers. And then we looked at the processes, and besides of the penny payment at the very end of the first process, it was basically the same. And if you think about penny payment, this is to provide KYC and AML assurances. But you can achieve these differently. You can actually do it invisibly. If you, for example, select the solutions that are certified for ADAS legislation. So there are actually ways to unify these flows into a single, very similar flow, basically indistinguishable for the end user.
This is good, actually, that you mentioned Moneta Money Bank, because they are really one of the innovators here in the whole regions, and they really developed their mobile application. They have loan origination, a full actually lending process for SMEs in their mobile.
Yeah.
Coming back to your comment and your answer regarding the process of customer authentication, let's get back to the question of the strong customer authentication. What is your opinion? Because years ago it was kind of a bit of frustrating that when it was implemented, like every of course all the banks had to implement and introduce it. But for the customer, it really became a bit of frustrating, because just before this, you had to, input your, let's say, login and passwords, and now with this strong authentication, this is also plus SMS. So kind of becoming a bit complicated for the customer. Where is the balance, on your opinion, between the security needed, of course, more and more, as you showed the statistics today, and actually with the smooth customer experience? How to find the balance?
That's Interesting question, and I think it is different channel from channel. So if you look at mobile banking, you have this activation process in the beginning or onboarding process in the beginning, and after that, the access is basically super simple thanks to technologies like Face ID and Touch ID. So on mobile, you do not really need to do anything else. Of course, some of the banks decided to introduce some additional anti-fraud system, for example, to identify low-risk payments and allow payment approval without a Face ID. I think that the user experience benefit is really marginal with these, biometric authentication mechanisms. I don't think it's worth doing, quite frankly, because it's fast already. On the web, the situation is slightly different. I think that the minimum baseline for authentication security would be using two-factor authentication somehow. We do not really need to have any additional items because two-factor authentication is probably as good as it gets. And I would definitely recommend looking at some behavioral biometrics and anti-fraud system to supplement the experience on the web, and maybe to help stop certain scenarios like those that we are currently experiencing. For example, reactivating mobile application from just hacked internet banking application. Unfortunately, fraudsters are quite creative. We can see that it takes approximately 1 week to adopt the script, basically the fraud script, to some additional measures that were introduced at the bank. But it's better than nothing. You need to be at least able to react on some situation instead of just saying, okay, that's happening, and resign.
What do you think should be done? Maybe not only from the bank side to change this situation, because this is a very sad statistics. About 50% of successful fraudulent calls, and as you mentioned, this will be increasing. What should be done? Because new schemes arise, banks implementing new security measures, while in the answer the fraudsters, as you said, create something new and it going in circles. So what should be done?
I will have a controversial opinion, because typical go-to answer for this question is education, right? We need to educate customers a little better, outside. No, I think that we need to exclude users from any decision. We basically need to design security in a way where users cannot screw up. This is our model of naked troll in a phone booth. That's exactly what we did. We basically assumed that it's completely useless as an element of security. We cannot rely on users doing anything correctly. And the statistic actually says that we are right. If you think about, 50% of fraudulent calls result in damage. That's horrifying. It's every second person. When you walk in the city, look at every second person, and this is the person who gets hacked if they get the call. And it's about designing passwordless experience based on something that users can provide but cannot provide to anybody, cannot fake, like a facial biometrics. Everybody has their face, and they cannot easily share it with the attackers just by typing it into some field. So I think it's basically about excluding users from authentication, just authenticating the user, making technical improvements in this direction. Of course, there are some limitations. We can clearly see that it would be very nice to be able to bind a user with a smartphone close to the actual laptop with the internet banking, so that you can recognize situation that somebody is connecting from, or deep in Russia, hacker type of situation, and user is approving something on the mobile in the Czech Republic, for example, from legitimate transactions.
While I will ask my next questions, I do invite attendees. We can have a moment or two for your questions and answers. So please do not hesitate if you have ones. I wanted, Petr, to ask you. You mentioned behavioral biometrics. I heard from several banks that they're testing these solutions, and still, if I'm not mistaken, I haven't noticed that somebody implemented. Do you have experience on that? And if you can tell a bit more about the usage of it.
Sure. So I would again separate it by the channel. I think that on mobile is basically no-go solution. I'm not sure that you can do behavioral biometrics on mobile simply because mobile vendors, Apple and Google, are hiding some information from you, basically. For example, on iOS, you have a pressure sensor for how hard you push to the display, but Apple actually gives you like 4 values only, like 4 numbers all the time. They do not have continuous pressure measurement for you, so you cannot do it on mobile. On the web, I think that keystroke dynamics is a well designed and well tested mechanism that banks can definitely use as additional measure to all the other things. It can help them get false positives. It can help them catch some additional fraud. It cannot be the only measure on the web that they use for recognizing fraud. For example, it always should be in combination with, for example, new IP address or some old school and relatively well defined fraud mechanisms. And similarly, mouse movement can give some relatively good measurements of the biometrics. If we talk about any biometrics or any authentication for that matter, it's always this discussion about the false acceptance rate and false rejection rate. It's also the case with cryptographic biometrics, but the probabilities are defined in the mathematics behind it, so it's a little bit easier. But with the behavioral biometrics, as with any biometrics, you should be always asking your vendors for false acceptance rate and false rejection rate based on some real world measurements, not some synthetic tests.
Yeah. Let's end then with the final business question to you.
Thank you.
So, how banks can, let's call it, monetize mobile customer onboarding right now? So why they should implement it right now?
Well, at some point it will be required. It will be a requirement, just like account opening on mobile. So this will happen eventually. I think that currently the benefit is mostly about being first. That's a good benefit actually. First on the market. That's a good value. I think that it's at some point more common because the usage of mobile banking in general grows quite significantly. So if you want to attract people for under 30 years of age, it's probably better to start on a mobile, which to me it's actually also difficult to digest. I'm already getting old, realizing it slowly.
Yeah.
But I think that most of the people these days, they just do not care so much about web, right? So you need to be ready for mobile, and also the process can be much better, much easier, because you have many more capabilities on smartphone. You have camera, which you can use readily. You have biometric sensors that you can use readily. You have a lot of things that you cannot do on classic web. So it's maybe a good idea to think about mobile first access. And I will also add that most of the banks that we can see implemented this mobile authenticator concept, right? That when you are logged into the internet banking, you use a mobile application, a mobile token. And so it's a good idea to actually activate this mobile token just on the mobile without anything else, without branches or internet banking. So the mobile identity is becoming your primary identity. Basically, the mobile devices are carriers of your ID.
It is. Exactly. Yes. Thank you very much, Petr. Thank you very much for your contribution, for your brilliant presentation, for your answers. Thank you. And thank you to all our attendees for being with us, staying to the very end. Thank you. And see you next time online during our next webinars.
Thank you, Olena.